各位观众，大家好，我是黄齐元，欢迎收看智门 Smart Gate 以及我们的线上节目 Dr. Change 黑天鹅学院。每个礼拜四，我会邀请一位贵宾来到我们的节目，谈一些话题，通常是某个重要的产业的趋势，或者是跟这位贵宾他个人亲身经历有关的一些事情。我们最近节目呢做了好几集，都有这个请外国的朋友来。今天呢，我请了一位也是美国的朋友，但是他在台湾已经有30年，将近30年的时间，是一个台湾通那么他呢跟我一样是在证券的行业，他之前在这个证券公司提供研究报告，那给这国外的机构法人。那这2年呢，他加入了一个家族办公室就是大家知道，就是帮忙某一个家族国外的家族呢管理财富的，那负责投资理财。他非常非常了解台湾的资本市场，也是我们台湾的友人他的夫人也是我们台湾人。所以今天呢，我很高兴也很荣幸邀请到他到我的节目来。那他就是这个 TriOrient 的负责人Chris Cottorone 陈历世历史的历，世界的世。Chris, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, CY. Thank you.
Yeah, and Chris, to start with, I think it is better. I know you for so long, but it is better. Actually, I know you are also very good in Mandarin, so either Chinese or English, whatever you prefer. 介绍一下你自己 introducing your background. You have a fascinating background from the U.S., study here, and then also got married here locally and coming back and forth. So please.
Well, thank you. I've been in Taiwan now this time, as you mentioned, almost 30 years. I came back in 1996 after I finished my first master's degree in America. Before that, I was an undergraduate in political science, and that was in 1988, 89. I was in Beijing, actually. So I was studying undergraduate.
So Tiananmen, at that time, you were in Beijing.
I left actually in January of 1989. I went back, graduated my final semester in May. I was getting tutored actually at the University of Rochester, my hometown, where my university was. And
Tiananmen was September?
In June.
Oh, in June. Oh, so right after you graduated.
Yes, and actually it's even more interesting than that because I was at the University of Rochester being tutored in Chinese because I wanted to go to graduate school for Chinese studies. And at the University of Rochester at the time, Deng Xiaoping's son was going there. He was getting his PhD. And my tutor, who was also from Beijing, she was getting her PhD. She was my Chinese tutor. I was asking, if they would run into Deng Xiaoping's son every so often.
但是邓直方是吧？
郑直方。
邓直方，对啊 ，OK 的。I'm the very few people know that you say 邓小平的儿子。Yeah,
Deng Xiaoping, Deng Zhifang, he was studying there. And they would ask every so often, what do you think's going to happen? And we never believed that nothing, that anything would happen serious. We thought that they would kind of work it out and everything would be okay. Strangely enough, the day I took my entrance examination to get in graduate school so I could study Chinese.
At that time, you were in the States? Or
in the States. And it was on my birthday, June 3rd. That day was June 4th, 1989. So I went and took my test in the morning.
Oh, yeah, June 4th 是64天嘛 Of course, it's June. 我都把日期忘了。
And I got home. After my test, I was going to go celebrate my birthday with my friends. And then my brother was sitting watching TV. He was on his computer and said, Chris, turn on the television. Actually, the Tiananmen Square incident happened. So actually, of course, all my foreign classmates were safe. They had been kind of flown out afterwards. But of course, there were a lot of other students at our university in Beijing who obviously were there and never made it out. So I think the big thing for me was, I wound up instead of going back to Beijing to study for my graduate degree, I came to Taiwan because I got into graduate school at the University
89.
of Beijing. No, I got in actually 1990.
1990
year off. I came in
90年1990年来台湾。
Yeah, I came in.
And in Beijing, study political science or Chinese?
So, Chinese and history, actually.
Okay.
Chinese and history, yeah. And I was a political science undergraduate. But then I got into graduate school for international management and also for East Asian studies. And that's partly why I came back to Asia after I got my master's degree.
Right. So tell me about, at that time, right after everybody was so bullish about China, a lot of positive things, and then suddenly, June 4th, Tiananmen, can you recall what's your feeling back then?
Oh, of course. It was shock. I was always talking to different professors trying to get into different graduate schools for Chinese studies, and they were all shocked too. And, I was living in Rochester, New York, my hometown, and there was Kodak, Xerox, many international companies. I knew many of the people who I had met in Beijing who said, when you get done with your undergraduate degree, when you get into graduate school, talk to us because China's the future. We can help you go back there. It changed overnight, obviously, as we know. China, for at least a few years in the beginning of the 1990s, was almost like a pariah. It was very difficult to do business there. Nobody was going back there. And I feel fortunate that I came to Taiwan at that time because Taiwan was still opening up at that time too. But in terms of business and things like that and technology, obviously Taiwan was much.
So 90 you came to Taiwan to study where? 师大 or 台大?
At 师大. I was on an exchange program. I was actually a 教育部奖学金学生. So I was studying Chinese there for 1 year. It was my second year of graduate school. And then I went back, finished my degree. I was working for a year or two, and then I came back to Taiwan in 1996.
Okay. And then after you come to Taiwan in 1996, you have been talking with us about your securities investment experience. So you were on the sales side, writing research report. Is that what you're doing?
Actually, for the first few years, I was in the technology industry. I was working because when I was in the United States, I was actually working in technology. I came to Taiwan. I was general manager for some international technology-related trading companies. And then also I worked with a networking and kind of Wangtong Chanye networking firm for several years. I even wound up working in the internet planning department for PowerChip Semiconductor, one of their 子公司, their subsidiaries, for several years. But I decided
PowerChip 就是那个历经黄崇仁，你以前也是他的员工。Oh, really? 我的这个是很厉害的外国朋友啊！他不但知道资通产业是什么，有些人还不知道，他还帮这个就是这个黄崇仁 PowerChip 历经集团这个工作过。
And it was a great experience. I got to learn a lot about the vibrancy of Taiwan's technology industry, the semiconductor industry. I was on the networking side, managing their global websites for one of the subsidiaries. It was a software subsidiary. But I decided I wasn't really a technology person. I wasn't an engineer. So I decided I wanted to go into business and become a manager at the higher level. So I did my international MBA here at Zhengzhou University, Zhengzhou Dashi, the Shangshui Yuan. I was in school while I was working. I was also studying.
Also, you got your MBA here, 正大,
yes.
IMBA.
IMBA.
International. Yeah, that was taught in English.
Yes. And it was a great experience. I mean, Taiwan, really one of the features of Taiwan is that the education system is excellent all the way through from K all the way through university. When I was at Zhengda, I was in classes where if we had 50 students, 25 were from Taiwan. And that's where I started to learn about the family-run businesses and the family offices.
Yeah, they have some very famous 司徒达贤, Xu Sijun, but those are the gurus. They are the gurus, considered in the management science.
And then we'd have 25 students from all different countries because of the international program. And I had actually, I wrote my first thesis as an undergraduate on Chinese family businesses and the management, overseas Chinese family businesses, because I thought that was a very interesting thing, especially when you talk about Taiwan, you talk about these communities of Chinese around Southeast Asia, how they run their businesses is very different sometimes and very successful.
Right. So, you've been here, for almost 30 years. Tell us about the differences you observe in the 90s, in the 2000s, and then, after 2010 and until the latest 10 years of the booming semiconductor decade, what have you observed over in general, not particular, but in general, 看到这个台湾的环境, the change, what's your general observation and your personal feeling?
It's been interesting. I mean, every decade has been different. We've kind of come in waves. I got here in the mid to late 1990s. Taiwan was still pretty much flying under the radar. I got here right before the Asian financial crisis, but Taiwan seemed to kind of get through that very easily because they had a very conservative kind of financial industry. By the year 2000, things had changed a lot because then we had a new government come in for the first time at the presidential level. China at the same time was getting into the WTO, so a lot of things were opening up on that side of the strait. And I was in business, so I was going back and forth. And then by 2008, then suddenly things changed again, another major change, which was the KMT came back in as the president and they took over the government again. And then things started to focus on China. Instead of international and the US and Europe, it was more about China. And then we went through several years of that where I was already by that time in the investment industry. And I was meeting a lot of companies, and their mindset had changed because they used to be globalized, but then they were now focusing a lot of their efforts on the China market, which was understandable because the China market was booming at that time. But then again, another change happened maybe around 2014, 2015, where companies started to see maybe diminishing returns. They saw the rising competition, And that's when we are kind of where we are right now, which is you're seeing more of Taiwan returning to an important role in the global supply chains because they moved a lot of the supply chains out of China. So that's what we're in this another phase now where Taiwan is now focused on technology and many other industries, and the world is noticing the value that Taiwan has as a partner in many supply chains.
Right. The very few foreign people I know so much about Taiwan. In particular, the family business of small and medium size. There are some foreign people here, but they focus primarily on TSMC, on the semiconductor chain. But you, on the other hand, so do a lot of the field trip talking with these 中南部, small, medium-sized companies. So I know you told me before, you're very diligent. You have every week you visit the companies. I guess you still do that. So tell us your experience in dealing with the vibrant Taiwanese small SME, small, medium-sized enterprises. What have you been seeing? Of course, people say 台湾中小企业很厉害, they are great, but of course now, facing the global challenge, they also face some obstacles and challenges. On the other hand, they have the counterpart rising from China, and a Chinese company have been in general more aggressive, expanding globally, have this sort of 狼性 aggressiveness in expanding. That's what Taiwanese company in general lacking of. So tell us about你的观察, your observation about Taiwanese SMEs.
Well, they're very special. I think one of the reasons why Taiwan had an economic miracle that actually in the 1970s and 80s was one where as Taiwan got richer, it became more equitable, meaning the Gini coefficient indicated that people were getting more, the wealth was dispersed well, is because I think a lot of it was that the fact that Taiwan had a lot of small, medium-sized enterprises that were family-run businesses where a lot of people benefited when Taiwan moved into export promotion. So when I started as I mentioned, my first thesis was on Chinese family businesses. So one of the reasons why the current group I'm with in the financial industry wanted me to kind of join their team was because they knew I could get in there and talk to the families. I could speak Chinese with them. I wanted to know more about their management
When you say the
structure.
Chinese family business, 你是说台湾的 family business 还是中国的 family business?
Taiwan to family business.
Taiwan to family business. Okay.
Although some will say, they a lot of them, even like with my wife, they trace their ancestry back to, let's say, Fujian province.
Right.
So they see themselves as Chinese in many ways, or at least ethnically Chinese.
But the subtle thing these days, the president, is trying to make a distinction between 台湾人, the 中国人 or whatever. So when we used to be, when we say, Chinese, 我们中国人. But nowadays we have to say, 我们中国人, are we 中国人 or 台湾人, something. So this is all the geopolitics. That's another change over the last decade.
And I guess it's a great point because sometimes I have to say, or I try to describe it to other people as Huaran, ethnically Chinese. And I can say that, one of the things I noticed many things about the family businesses. First, on the positive side, some of the great attributes, they really care about their businesses. Remember, these are not just businesses, they're families. And they're their long-term, their 宝贝, so to speak. They want to go to the next generation. Even when I was at National Zhengzhou University, Zhengda, a lot of the kids there were studying finance or whatnot. And it was because they wanted to maybe have a backup in case they didn't want to be in their family business. But I saw them being very hardworking. I saw them also being very experts in their industry. They knew these industries very well. I think the challenges I saw them face, though, was, again, just like all family businesses, and I'm of an American of Italian ancestry, so we have a lot of family businesses as well, too. And there's problems sometimes in generational transformation, handing over power to the next generation, bringing in talent from outside if they're not part of the family, and then also even capital formation. I think this is very important, and I try to communicate this to, let's say, investors around the world who want to come to Taiwan, which is that, if you're investing in Taiwan, you have to understand you're not talking to a company. Unlike Japan, which are a lot of the keiretsu, or the big companies, and the chaebol in Korea, those are very big corporations. In Japan, they're often very professionally run. The families don't run them as much anymore. And in Korea, they have still family running, but they're still very big. Taiwan has a lot of zhongxiao qiye, small, medium-sized enterprises, and family-run businesses. And it makes it kind of difficult, I'd say, for some companies to come in and do what, let's say, a private equity firm can do in other markets. They have to really understand and figure out what's in the best interest of these firms, because a lot of times the family doesn't want to sell out their holdings to other companies. They want to try to give that to the next generation. And these companies have been doing, and they play also very key roles in global industry. So it's not even easy for them to do it because they play such important roles with their partners and their clients around the world now. Taiwan is a really special market in that there are many, many supply chains here. And a lot of these companies are SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises, and family-run businesses, and they play very critical roles in the world.
You mentioned about 传承 succession and the Taiwanese company. And Taiwanese companies, I have to admit, are not that good at the succession. A lot of people love to work, and they work, the first generation work until they're 70, 80. And my dad has his family business. I now inherited his family business in addition to FCC, which is my own business, investment banking. But he owns a ocean and marine service company. We used to be the dealer of the largest German diesel engine MTU here in Taiwan for 40 years. And my dad worked until he passed away 8 years ago at the age of 94. And even at 93, we still have the 佣人, 推车每天推着他到公司, even at that time, he's not doing a lot of things, just reading newspaper. He still care, that is his baby, his lifetime, he made it happen. But the thing is, many these business, the succession, now we are facing, now the people, the first generation have to retire because they are really old or they are really sick. And the challenge is that some of the second generation are not interested in inherited business. They want to do investment, technology, internet, blockchain, but they don't want to do heiso, the manufacturing in Suzhou, in Fujian, elsewhere. That's not their interest. And then, so I do see a lot of these challenges. And plus, I'm an investment banker, so I talk with a lot of companies. But China actually, they are more, the inclined to pass over to other. I wouldn't say next generation, but just pass to other people. Sometimes for political reasons, Jack Ma, he retired because Xi Jinping, they got scared. And then Biden's 字节跳动, 那个叫张什么, he also, he's not retired, but he's the back, no longer on service at the top. So what's your observation about the professional management and the succession and these SMEs, because it seems that Taiwan has certainly have some strengths, but we are at a critical juncture where when we talk about succession, and now we have the global challenges and also the China, the geopolitical risk, and now the emergence in Southeast Asia market. So the family business, you study family business. What's your observation and advice that you can give to Taiwanese enterprise? Because I know lots of them has lots of headache.
Well, you said it exactly right. It's a very big challenge right now. In addition to those problems you're talking about, those headaches, one is that we have Taiwan has 少子化. It's a low birth rate. It's one of the lowest birth rates in the world, and that means that there's not even the people to take over the industry, as well as the company, as well as bringing in new talent sometimes. Because I know a lot of companies in Taiwan, they're not short of capital. Sometimes they're not short of technology. They're not short of orders. What they're short of is actually personnel. And the other thing, too, is Taiwan, because they're very competitive in a lot of different industries, we have a lot of companies competing. Sometimes the salary structure is lower, too. So trying to attract that talent is also difficult because, remember, a lot of companies are used to paying their family members and having family members. So you don't really just want to boost salaries up like that. You don't need to. So I think there's a lot of challenges that they're facing right now. I think besides the ones you mentioned, I think the other thing too is you're right. China is a very big competitor, and one of the other reasons why they had to do it, they had no other choices. Remember, with the One China policy, it was unlikely that they're going to be running privately run, family-run businesses with a huge team of brothers and sisters running the company. So Taiwan has this advantage, I think, in that they understand people, they understand the importance of family in the society. It's a very open, free society, freedom of religion, freedom of choice, all these things, but at the same time, what they're trying to do, I think, right now is figure out how they can further internationalize those who want to take over their parents', let's say, their firms. And there are still a lot because these firms are very valuable. And I know that kids have been trained overseas and locally to do that. For those ones, we need to try to support them to make sure that they can continue to do this. And I think often in the traditional industries, it's much easier to do that because having a family-run business in the traditional industry may not be so difficult. But when you're talking about very highly specialized or scientific types of firms, semiconductors, biotechnology, those are the ones that I think Taiwan is going to have to make a decision and try to more professionalize the management teams and the ownership. And that's where they need to work with foreign investors, I think, on. And another thing too would be that, when we're going into areas, let's say Southeast Asia, for example, I know you're an expert in that area as well too. This is where there's an advantage, I think, for Taiwan firms. I tell a lot of international investors, you can go to Southeast Asia on your own, but there's a lot of experience from Taiwan, and it's better to partner with Taiwan firms because a lot of the families may even have families there in Malaysia, in Thailand, in Vietnam, in these countries. So I think the family part of it is actually the vibrancy of Taiwan, but at the same time, with the generational change, with a lot of the Laoban, the Chongban and the founders retiring, I think some of those companies the children may not want to take it over, and that's where they need to bring in private equity in these types of firms. But with the ones that the families do want to continue to take it over, the government needs to figure out how to support that and also make sure that they have the capital and the talent they need to do it.
Well said, well said. And then I also want to touch base on the sales side experience in the security 证券. You were a research analyst for a long time. So perhaps you can share with us your experience. You've been covering actually consistently 台湾的中小企业作为一个外资的证券研究分析师 for so many years until in the last 5 years you switched to the buy side, become the 基金经理人. 但是 you've been covering the sales side. I'm on the similar side of business. I've been doing investment banking for 37 years. That's also on the sales side, but I cover the primary market doing IPO, mergers, acquisition. But I also do know, the firms I used to work for, Jardine Fleming, CLSA, they're very strong in research, in stockbroking, in trading, sales. So tell a little bit about your experience on the sales side, covering Taiwanese small, medium-sized company as a research analyst. And I've been wondering, our foreign investors, foreign investors used to be interested in these, but maybe, I don't know, maybe no longer. The people now just focus on TSMC, MediaTek, and Foxconn, and people now just focus on ETF. So bring back your valuable and interesting experience, perhaps share with us a bit.
Well, it's actually, there's a lot of interest, I think, from people around the world to invest in the Taiwan market, especially as I mentioned, this last wave, these changes going on, the geopolitical changes, as companies are moving out, let's say, of China, and they're coming back to Taiwan. The companies have become much more valuable, much more interesting. And again, the level of technology in Taiwan has been incredibly important. Remember, now we're talking about not just semiconductors or PCs, we're even talking about AI. And these companies want to know the entire value chain. Of course, they can kind of master all their holdings in TSMC and Honghai and MediaTek, but they want to find out these other companies down the supply chain or their suppliers. So we're actually seeing a lot more companies and investors coming in who want to be part of the supply chain, and they want to go into these small, medium-sized companies. I think that also started a few years ago because at the same time, Taiwan is branching off into biotechnology, for example. And there were all new players. Nobody knew about these companies, but they knew they were very exciting. I always thought that the biotechnology, and I still do think the biotechnology is one of those industries that will benefit Taiwan because similar to the chip industry, it takes a lot of education. It took a long time to build. You need the same type of standards in terms of quality. And Taiwan has a lot to offer because it's a healthcare system, and the society here places an emphasis on it. And these companies are very well educated. And they also get support from the government as well, too. So you have a lot of people who studied overseas. They come back and they build their company. The government's here supporting, and they also have the education system. So the companies, the investors who want to know about this, they like the Taiwan market because unlike, let's say, Singapore or some of these other markets where there may be a very vibrant primary market, Taiwan actually has a very vibrant stock market, a secondary market, with almost, now actually over 2,000 firms that are listed on both exchanges, the Taiwan Stock Exchange and Taipei Exchange. And that's important because it gives them an opportunity to get that exposure with some of these leading industries, with some of these key players, and they may be doing it sometimes at very good valuations. And also, too, the Taiwan stock market, it's actually very safe in some ways because, remember, they have an up and down limit on how much a stock can appreciate or depreciate in one day at 10%. So it means that an investor comes here and they're not going to suddenly see a company that they invested in suddenly get bombarded by 20% or 30%, which may happen in some of the bigger stock markets. But I think overall, though, what I see from a lot of companies is for the small, medium-sized companies, where I think the challenge is trying to get the information on them. Why do we spend so much time on knowing these companies is because a lot of times they don't have a lot of information in English. So we are willing to go and meet these companies and talk to the chairman and talk to the Jining Tuandui, their management team, because you can't really get the real value of these companies just looking at what might be a very brief report from some securities house. You need to actually talk to them and find out, because a lot of times too, they're also, if they're OEMs or ODMs, they're not really willing to kind of talk about all these technologies. They want to try to protect that. But when you go in there, they're actually very accessible. And they are willing to talk to investors because they want to be able to open up opportunities in terms of investment and partnership and that.
Yeah, you made an excellent point. Say that Taiwan does have a very vibrant secondary market. Maybe not so vibrant IPO market. I'm doing the IPO, but Taiwan recently, because of the valuation going high, so the IPO is revived again. But secondary market, there are a lot of companies. I don't even recall the number, but you mentioned 2,000. But for foreign investors, I understand they probably focusing only on 50 at the most, 100 of them. They probably only targeting the 5% of them. Is that true? I know there are some foreign firms, Peter Kurz, QIC, they focus on smaller cap. But all in all, the foreign investors are interested in Taiwan in general, but the particular sector, electronics, IT, semiconductor, and only a few stocks. Is that right?
Actually, there's a lot of companies, especially remember too, you have a lot of now computer trading, you have a lot of ETFs, you have a lot of mutual funds. So a lot of these companies are coming in doing, let's say, indexing. So they're coming in, they're getting parts of a lot of different companies. And Taiwan companies have been increasing their market cap, so they become exposed and they get into these international, the MSCI, for example, these international indices. So what happens is, and I've seen this now, is we find out that if you look at the shareholder structure from some even small, medium-sized companies, you may find a State Street or a Jane's or these types of international investors who are actually there. And they may have a small stake, and they may not be very active investing, but they're actually still have exposure to these companies because, again, these companies may all be part of the TSMC, for example, supply chain.
But they got to be in the ETF because ETF composition, you need to have a certain liquidity and a certain market cap size. So to make into the composition of the ETF, 已经是比较大的企业了。就是你如果是很 mini 的企业，是 not even in the ETF. So what you're talking about, then some firms, they hedge funds, they may accumulate a position, but I would guess these are, although not make our market cap like TSMC, but at least they need to be certain above average medium-sized companies.
There's definitely, it's not the micro caps or small caps. Those ones are a little more difficult, especially too, you have an emerging market, the Xingui here. And most foreigners don't touch that. We are able to do that. We're a registered foreign institutional investor, or 外资投资公司. So we can do that. So we can even invest in, let's say, early startups. But a lot of times, right, they're bigger caps, but still, when you're talking about Taiwan, other than, let's say, the big caps like you're talking about Honghai, TSMC, MediaTek, these groups, there are still a lot of companies that maybe they invested in, let's say, a group. Remember, there's a lot of also Jituan Gongsi. And a lot of companies we're seeing that they come in and they may invest in, let's say, a major company like Honghai, but then Honghai has a lot of small companies too. For example, in Honghai, there's a group called Enokan, Huahan. There's so many companies around the world that know that. I think most investors will go after a company like that. They really appreciate it. And they're also, the chairman who I know,
Steve Chu,
right? And
yeah,
he is one
excellent company, excellent general manager.
Excellent, hardworking, and also too, every time I go to their Fashuo from time to time. We were also shareholders for a while. You go to a company like that, and he's very, very dedicated and trying to communicate and trying to take care of the interests of the foreign investors and all shareholders. And that's what I mean. I think, like I say, when it comes to some of these shareholders, the foreign shareholders, a lot of these chairmen, a lot of the management teams, they value them very well, very highly, because they know that's their, in a way, also their exposure to the rest of the world. So I think you're actually seeing a push and pull too. Companies coming here want to be part of it. And also, just in the last 2 years or so, these companies are coming to us and say, we want more foreign investors on our shareholder list.
Interesting. Let us talk a little bit about my side of business, private equity, or venture capital, the private companies, because that is Taiwan actually still have some room to catch up. We say alternative assets, 另类资产. Insurance company, they got so many assets. I was told that total assets is 36 trillion NTD. Can you believe it? That's over $1 trillion US. But very few percentage, I would say less than 5% invested in alternative assets. But that is a very big asset category in foreign pension fund, the mutual fund, endowments. They all invest in the private equity side of business. Do you see that increasing interest from foreigners' point of view in investing in private equity in Taiwan?
Definitely. I'll start by saying there's definitely an interest in this. Trying to translate that interest into actual activity is going to be a little bit of a challenge still.
Yeah, I know, excuse me, that you are sit on the AmCham, American Chamber of Commerce. You sit on the board of you are the 外资私募股权协会的 chair. You're chair of the PE committee.
That's right, exactly right. The co-chair for the private equity committee at the American.
Who's the other chair? Morgan Stanley or no? Who?
Oh no, the other chair is actually one of the. It's a lawyer, local law firm who actually specializes in M&A type of deals.
Okay.
So they know from the regulatory side because AmCham, one of the major focuses of AmCham is the advisory function, which means that they go in and they advise the Taiwan government how to make it more friendly for foreign investment, for inbound, outbound investment. So we write a white paper every year in June, and we just published it this year. And we always get good feedback from the government. What they can change and what they can't change is what we negotiate. But I think they're always interested to hear what they can do to improve the environment overall for foreign investment. But for foreign investors, let's say for the primary market, I've been seeing for the last couple of years, especially now, I think because you see after the problems in the China market, for example, a lot more investors have been coming in saying, look, I'm maybe going to scale down a little bit of investment in China, maybe even pull out, but they want to still have exposure in Asia because Asia is a high-growing region, and Taiwan is one of the strongest markets around the world in terms of its economy. What was it, the 14th largest, I think was the news yesterday. So the big thing is that they want to come in, but they don't know much about the market. And again, it goes back to what we're talking a little bit earlier, which is that these firms, a lot of them are still family-run businesses. How do you have a private equity come in and maybe do an M&A deal? How do they come in and do an acquisition? It's difficult. I think it can be done, but I think it's just not the same that's done, let's say, in other markets. Because those markets, you can go in and if you go into Japan, for example, I think a lot of people are looking at the Japan market and trying to learn lessons from it because Japan is a very vibrant M&A market, a lot of private equity firms going in there. Taiwan needs to do some of that, but it will be a little bit different. Like I said, they'll have to talk with the government. They have to look at the supply chains, how that will play if they acquire a company. We've seen this in Taiwan too, where some companies were even locally taken over by a rival management camp, but because they were a supplier, let's say a key supplier to, let's say, a company like TSMC got involved and said, you cannot change your business. We need that product, that service you provide our company. It's so important that you cannot just buy the company out from an outside management team and change it. So that's why I say Taiwan has this very, very well-developed group of supply chains across many industries. We look at the Taiwan stock market as kind of like the NASDAQ of Asia. A lot of small, medium-sized enterprises, very, very creative, 创意的比率很高. They have a lot of things to do, and there's just a lot of different industries. It's not just chips, it's traditional industries, biotechnology, now AI, shipping, as you know, transportation, raw materials, Formosa Plastic Group, for example. And I think the private equity firms want to get in on this, but I think, again, they need people like yourself who can provide that expertise to understand the market. Because, again, I know a lot of them can go to Singapore, they can go to Hong Kong, they can go to these other markets, and it's pretty well open. There's a lot of information in English. These companies are actually bigger. But like I said, when it comes to the opportunities for private equity firms in Taiwan, they're still facing a challenge, even including in the venture capital side, because even the venture capital side, these companies play some very important roles for the larger companies, the MediaTeks, the TSMCs. So even that, the government and the companies themselves are a little cautious about opening up the treasure chest of all these new technologies to say, well, let a foreign company come in and buy it, maybe even move it offshore. I think, though, the future of Taiwan, of course, will be how internationalized it is.
And so the challenge you mentioned is maybe the government is not really opening up or be friendly toward foreign investors, the buying into Taiwanese company. In fact, very interesting you mentioned that because it's Taiwan, on the listed security side, there's the FSC, 金管会, Financial Supervisory Commission. They like to keep the market order, as it can be seen in the recent example of the financial holding company takeover, Taixing, Xinguang, and then there's CTBC trying to take over, and the government say, wait a minute, we want to have an orderly market. And but on the other hand, for the private investor, in the past, I've been advising some deals, private equity, for example, I don't know where you recall this, 14 years ago, they tried to privatize 国巨 Yagyu, but it was rejected by the FSC. They say, oh, 影响社会观感。They think foreign private equity as a vulture capital, 秃鹰基金。They think foreign private equity don't bring in much value to the table. And then there are some foreign private equity that sit on the stake of Taiwanese company for like as long as like 15 years. They cannot get out. Long Reach, Longli is one of them. They've been investing in anti-Yinhang. I think must be 15 years, the long time. They tried to get out, they couldn't get out. So a lot of these challenges, hurdles. But what you're saying is that what I heard correctly is that foreign investors, if these regulatory hurdles can be removed or reduced, foreign investors are interested in Taiwanese private equity, private companies.
Of course. I mean, again, we go back to the basics, the fundamentals. These companies are quality companies. They're in very important industries. They have crucial technologies or services. So there would be impossible for any investor to not see the value in that. I think where the obstacles are, like you mentioned, there's some regulatory procedures or regulatory hurdles they face. That's not unexpected because, again, Taiwan is unfortunately in many ways outside the world system in many international organizations. It's not even in the IMF, for example, the International Monetary Fund, which it should be, because if you can do that, then you're putting Taiwan into the global framework of the international monetary system. Whereas, Taiwan, look how much it benefited from being in the World Trade Organization, for example. So the important thing, and this is what we at AmCham, we talk with the government regularly, and they're very receptive. It's again, though, they have to balance what they know is a very important economy that's kind of running on its own. And by the way, too, Taiwan is a very affluent society. It's not like they don't have the money to run the market here by themselves. You can have local investors provide a lot of the capital. Where I think the changes are coming, you're seeing it from overseas, they see it, and locally as well, too, is I used to go visit companies, let's say 15 years ago, and I'd say, what's your 资本支出? 明年你要扩产多少? How much do you want to expand?
Capital expenditure, CapEx.
And they say, maybe next year, 明年5%, 5%, maybe 5% or 10% more. In the last 2-3 years, it's now, 2倍, 5倍. 明年我要开3个工厂, maybe 一个在墨西哥, 一个在东欧洲, 一个在那个东南亚. And suddenly they need a lot more capital because the supply chains are changing.
Supply chain. So let us talking about our supply chain. That's all really related with the subject I've been talking. You've been following geopolitics, 地缘政治, So a lot of that supply chain is now the decoupling of supply chain. Used to be the market in the United States, the manufacturing in China, but the decoupling, now the supply chain moving to India, to Vietnam, Southeast Asia, to Mexico, or Eastern Europe, the Czechoslovakia, other places. So on the 地缘政治, and now there's a lot of the Taiwanese companies are facing their clients say that they are now China +1, and then later Taiwan +1, meaning cannot be just a China manufacturing. You need to have another alternative source. And then, cannot be just focusing on Taiwan because Taiwan has a geopolitical risk and also need to have a backup place. And now it's a China plus N, 要有2-3个 backup the place. Or Taiwan. And then I've been even heard about the clients told me that their customer requested Asia ex Greater China. 就不要中国, 不要台湾, just any place you go manufacturing, but cannot be in Taiwan, cannot be in China because of the China, the risk, and the Taiwan, the geopolitics risk. So what's your observation, the supply chain shift, the migration, geopolitics from a geopolitical point of view?
It's definitely something that's on everybody's radar, and I can explain why. I mean, let's face it. In Taiwan firms were actually seeing the tensions. I think even before Donald Trump stood up on January 20th in 2017 and said America first. I think they saw that they were having, I'd say, diminishing returns in a country in China that was also in many ways state-owned enterprises that were able to kind of take business and kind of dominate supply chains, even dominate their competitors. That's not to say that China is closing, but it was much more competitive for a lot of firms. So what happens is for the next couple, maybe 2-3 years, we have the economic pressure that's applying to companies and supply chains to pull out, tariffs and things like that. And Taiwan was on the first wave of being impacted by that, both beneficially and negatively. But then we hit COVID, and then it becomes supply chain resiliency next. Okay, we want to move the supply chains out because we're not sure where we can trade and how because we have these pandemics and things. But then something happened that is we're in right now, which is in this geopolitical tension, which is suddenly it's February 2022, Russia attacks Ukraine. And then the same year, U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi comes to Taiwan, and the Chinese PLA surrounds Taiwan with the blockade, and everybody begins to say, okay, it's not just supply chains, it's not just resiliency, it's actually deterrence and defense, and we have national security issues. Suddenly, chips are not just about chips going into cars, it's chips being a national security issue. And I think, like I say, we talk about these companies or these strategies, say, well, maybe we just don't want to deal with China or Taiwan. I don't think that's ever going to be possible because remember, you're talking about first China, which is 1.4 billion people. That's 18% of the world's population. Hard to really ignore that. Taiwan is just too important, especially in terms of the supply chains.
Yeah, especially the high end, 90%, the other chips manufacturing, 60%.
Exactly. So it's impossible that they're going to do that. I think what they want to do is they want to try to, of course, reduce the risk. But we're in a period now where it was like it was many years ago, which was you have to be aware of the political and geopolitical tensions that are going on and the changes. You cannot just be an investor like it was, let's say, after the Cold War ended and say, oh, yes, it's all about markets and it's all about the WTO helping out. It's actually now you have to really think about where you want to put your business, where you want to put your investment, and things like that. Now, the positive thing about Taiwan is we have a very transparent system. I think the companies tend to think like companies do around the world and they play a very important role. I think the next phase, geopolitics will continue to be an important role. I think the next phase will be, instead of not just the economic pressure or the deterrence and the military pressure and defense pressure, the next one will be diplomatic pressure. And what I mean by that is, and that's why I say these conferences you've held, I think, are very important because, remember, we have two Koreas. There's two Koreas in the world. There's a Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and then there's the Republic of Korea. And in fact, Beijing has embassies in both. I think in the future, what people are going to start saying, look, Taiwan is just too important. And we just had the national holiday yesterday, so we know it's the Republic of China. There's a Republic of China and a People's Republic of China. I think what they're going to say
is...
You
know that, but there's still a lot of people that don't know about the differences. Some people, maybe not now, but 10 years ago, people cannot even tell the difference between Taiwan and Thailand.
Yes, and it's a problem. I think we're starting to see it. All governments, I think, here in Taiwan have been doing a good job to try to raise the exposure, raise the interest in Taiwan and understand what's going on. That's always important. But I think what countries around the world and governments are saying, and these others and the businesses are saying, look, it's just too important. We can't just say, okay, we'll just move all the supply chains out because remember, you have a very vibrant democratic society here. And I think actually Taiwan, we talked about ethnicity and things like that, but I still think Taiwan plays a very crucial role on what's going to happen on the future of the other side of the Taiwan Strait. Why? Because remember, a lot of these problems that both China and Taiwan faced over the last 50, 60, 70 years were the same, but they answered them very differently in terms of their government. And Taiwan now, and I think this has been the last few years, I get the feeling, is they're looking and they're saying, you know what, we had a lot of problems too economically. We went from a dictatorship to a economically modernized democratic society. How do we do that? And actually, we have a model. We have a model that we think will work even for China. And I think what I'd like to see, of course, is that there's greater communication between the two sides.
Who's saying that? You say the Americans saying that, or say Taiwanese people?
Taiwan people. Yeah, Taiwan said it because remember, they had all the problems that were faced in 1945 to 1949, especially in 1949.
So what you're saying is that some people in Taiwan saying, oh, things can work out. But what the government is saying is that, no. What the Lai Ching-te, William Lai is now refuse to the talk. So refuse the 和平 talk. So he doesn't want to talk and sit down, let's work out a peace solution. He said that several weeks ago publicly. I'm sure you're aware that he refused to talk privately. He say 备战. So meaning prepare for the war. So I don't know. It's interesting you brought up the subject. So I want to say, what's your observation? Because I got a lot of American friends say, why don't you Taiwanese stand up, fight like a man, like Ukraine, like they are just too nice that they're being bullying by the China. But here people are probably too complacent and people say, oh, they won't have any war. The American, the big brothers, they're going to protect us. Japan, they're going to protect us. Taiwan 有事, 日本有事, so Japan will protect us. So shall we 和平 or shall we fight?
I think it's very complicated. I mean, let's face it. I think not only do people not understand about Taiwan, the history. Remember, too, since 1971, most of the world, because Taiwan's not been recognized in the United Nations by most countries, they don't know what the story is. Remember, it used to be, when I was studying in the 1980s, if you were studying China, you had to study the Soviet Union because you had to study communist countries because they were both adversaries of the United States. Okay, 1990s comes, and then suddenly everybody is opening up to China by the late 1990s. And instead of coming to Taiwan first to learn about Chinese language, then going to China, they're flying right over Taiwan to get to China. So I think China wanted to marginalize Taiwan at that point, of course, the island, the Republic of China, and they were successful in doing that in many ways. So people don't know what it is here. And then, as you mentioned too, you've got the local population, which some of them came from mainland China. They identify themselves as ethnically Chinese or Chinese. And you got some people who identify themselves as being Taiwanese. But the reality is that I think everybody agrees that we're all pretty much in agreement that, look, we know that there's a society that was divided by the Cold War, just like Germany was, just like Vietnam was, just like Korea was. The difference, of course, with China and Taiwan is you have two countries which are very, very different in size, right? Very, very different in terms of what their history was, because China was an immense economy for several centuries. Okay, they had to deal with the humiliation, the century of humiliation. Both governments, whether it's the Republic of China or the People's Republic of China, Beijing and Taipei, they thought about this. They feel that there was something that was destroyed in Chinese culture there. So they're trying to overcome these very, very difficult periods of the last 100 years, 200 years. But I think right now is, and even though what you say is correct about everything in these speeches, I do notice that the good thing is that even with the government today, the DPP government, I still think they have not said we don't want to be known as the Republic of China. They're still willing to put that in a lot of speeches. Now that I think will be important because again, you want to have some sort of diversity when you're coming to a negotiating table, when you want to talk.
This time in the 双十, the William Light talk about clearly, I guess probably American give him some pressure, so he say 中华民国, Republic of China, rather than say Taiwan, because in the past he's promoting Taiwan as an identity, but this time he say that 中华民国 has the history of 113 years, they dated it back, 1911, so he's now recognizing, willingly or unwillingly, but at least recognizing this ROC identity,
It's important, and I say this why, because remember, when Chiang Kai-shek came to Taiwan in 1949, remember, he was anti-communist, anti-communist, anti-communist.
Yes.
Right? And I think that's why the people actually still followed him, even if he was an autocrat at that time. I think they realized, look, we don't want to have that type of economic system. We don't want to have that type of economic and governmental system. And I think right now, when we're talking about this, remember, we may talk about, and I'm an American, so I hear this sometimes from time to time, people saying, well, the reason why Taiwan and China are not talking is because of the Americans, right? Well, I tend to go back a little bit towards that time you're talking about. I think the tensions between, let's say, the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China started around 1927 when Chiang Kai-shek launched out and attacked the Communist Party on the Northern Expedition. Now, I tend to think that there was a reason for that. I'm not against that because I'm not a communist. We're in the stock market. But I think that it's not just the United States that's separating China and Taiwan. I think that there's some very still fundamental differences in terms of how you're going to run a society, how you're going to run an economy. And again, remember, there's very difference. Remember, China is a big country that can have big organizations. Taiwan is not. But I think the main thing is that, like I say, we all want at least a few things. We want these tensions resolved peacefully. The second thing is, of course, peacefully very important because, to tell you the truth, and I
one that you also recommend to avoid war by all means.
Oh, by all means, because again, first I have a son who's 17 years old, and he's a Taiwan citizen and an American citizen. If there's a war, he'll probably have to fight either way because I don't think it's.
他必须要服兵役吗？他必须要当兵吗？
Both, of course,
okay.
Yeah, of course, and because he's a ROC citizen.
Okay.
So he would have to fight. So of course I don't want that. And the other reason though is because I don't think the world will be able to withstand a war and even a collapse by China at this point. I mean, let's face it. We may think about, okay, well, what would happen if China collapses like the Soviets did in the 1991, 1992? I don't think it's going to even be like that. We didn't expect it, and look what happened. We're still dealing with the fallout from that in the Ukraine, for example. But what I would maybe say is potential would be if something happens like that on the other side of the Taiwan Strait, it could be like 1912, where suddenly you have decades of chaos, globally even. Because now, remember, China is a much more integrated country into the world. The supply chains are very important. So I don't think it's rational for anybody to say, well, the strategy is, of course, to have the mainland China fall, to have the Communist Party thrown out of power. But this is why I say it's very important. Taiwan has a model. Remember, the KMT lost power. They lost China in 1949. They even lost power, the one-party state, by the 1980s, early 1990s. But they came back into power. And it's been peaceful. And I think there's a lesson there. And maybe even if, let's say, Beijing doesn't want to talk to one party here that might be in power, they still should actually still talk to the other party here too, because those two parties are representative of the people of Taiwan. And I think that, and by the way, just for full disclosure, and politically, and I'm a political science student, I support both parties in the United States, Democrats and Republicans. I think they both have different views of tackling different problems, and that's what makes them important.
Yeah, do you think that the Trump wins will be better for Taiwan, or Kamala Harris win will be better for Taiwan?
It's not really clear, unfortunate, because like I said, they both have things that they could provide Taiwan. I think right now we're seeing, I think fortunately, both Democrats and Republicans are both supportive of Taiwan. We've seen a lot of delegations come in from the Congress, Senate, and House of Representatives. The one issue that everybody says is when you talk about Taiwan, you mention Taiwan, both parties, they can't agree on anything, but they can agree on the importance of Taiwan. That's important, and Taiwan needs that. But I think that depending on which candidate, we're not sure yet. I think overall, though, Taiwan's important, and it'll be important to anybody in whoever is in the White House.
In the United States, it seems to me that, of course, definitely supporting Taiwan, but not to the extent of pushing for Taiwan independence, not to the extent of changing the status quo. They want to 维持现状, they want to peacefully. But the conflict there is still, I think, the fundamental problem. I think it's good that Will and Lai now recognize that ROC, this origin 113 years. 但是他说互不隶属, so ROC and you don't own me, I don't own you. You don't belong to me, I don't belong to you. We are two separate countries, and that is the fundamental difference between Taiwan and China. That's what China can. So that we are playing on that sensitive point, so I guess gonna be continue that way.
Let me just say this. 1971 happened. I don't think anybody realizes now. I think people have been talking about United Nations Resolution 2758, which is the one that basically
you are a political science student, so you know it very well. A lot of people don't know this 2758 resolution.
And that's one. It's very narrow. It doesn't say who owns Taiwan or whatnot. It basically says, look, the United Nations is
recognizing which China, the ROC China or the People's Republic of China.
And in fact, that small little passage, that little resolution, doesn't even mention the ROC. It says Chiang Kai-shek's government. That's the wording they use, which is actually very clumsy. A lot of scholars say it's clumsy. But back then, I think at that time, you had two different societies. You had one that was maybe 800 million people, a one-party state, not doing so well economically. You had the Republic of China and Taiwan, which was maybe 10 million people, not doing so well economically at that time, and a one-party state. So they decided, well, it doesn't make sense anymore to have China not be in the United Nations. However, the Albanian resolution went through that said, look, we can only do a zero-sum game. One goes in, one goes out. But as I mentioned, by 1991, the United Nations says, okay, the Cold War is ending. Why don't we put both Koreas in there at the same time? And the thing is, this is why I say China plays a little bit of role on this too, and they need to change their attitude a little bit because, remember, they've put in embassies in both Pyongyang in North Korea and Seoul in South Korea. So they know a society can be two societies divided by a political ideology, and I think that's important. And I think the same situation is going on here in Taiwan, and I think the world is starting to see that. It's taking some time because China has done a lot of work to make sure that the rest of the world believes in that one China principle as opposed to one China policy. The principle says Taiwan belongs to China, and that's in the United Nations resolution, which is not. The one China policy says, look, we all agree there should be one China, but we don't know which one it is. Who's going to be the one that wins out? Remember, it's still a civil war in a way. I think now, and this is the good thing about Taiwan and why I stay here, and I think we're on the kind of the right side of history is, again, Taiwan and whichever government you're talking about, they've solved a lot of these problems, and they've done it peacefully. They've done it to make sure that the benefit of the people are doing well. The companies are very well privately run, and I think that that's the model that I think even China can do. But remember, too, we're talking about a very large society on the other side of the Taiwan Strait. And I think where the problems are right now is we're realizing that although we allowed them to come into the WTO in 2001, you still have a country that's the largest country on the face of the earth, which is run by a one-party state, which doesn't accept dissent and doesn't allow changes in power. And also, too, at times now, as we're seeing with the EV industry, for example, electric vehicles, they run it often in a mercantilist approach. Kind of, we want to dominate the supply chain. Made in China 2025, we want to dominate all these key industries. That's not going to work very well. Everybody needs to trade. The WTO is losing power because one of the largest countries doesn't really want to open up for free trade in some ways, where it's a two-way street. So this is very difficult, whereas I say Taiwan's a model because you have all these family-run businesses, small, medium-sized enterprises, often ODMs and OEMs, that say, look, I'm not here to put my client out of business. I'm here to make sure my client is wildly successful. I was in northern Italy in July, and I met with trade investment professionals. I said, look, you're worried about, let's say, EVs coming in and putting out some of your company's businesses. So now look at a company like Foxconn, Honghai. They create this nice supply chain.
They enable their clients.
They empower those automakers that Taiwan firms create the parts for. They're not here to put Stellantis or Ferrari out of business. Xiaomi says they want to compete with.
Yeah, the Xiaomi said they want to be, in 20 years, they want to be top 5 in the world, top 3 in the world.
And I think, like I said, and this is why I say it's a very difficult issue, because you have an economy like Taiwan that, in all intents and purposes, is a very good partner for everybody in the world, whether you're an investor or a business person, whatnot, even the government. You have China, which is a large country that is still under a one-party government, and that one-party government is trying to protect its power by holding as much of the economic power as it can. I think, and we had leaders in Taiwan, let's say, for example, Li Donghui, who said, what will be the future of China? We have a country that powerful, that big, that maybe becomes richer than everybody else? Because remember, when you have power, when you have that kind of power, you have the power to have the biggest economy, and then, of course, the biggest military. And like I said, at that point, you really need them to be much more open democratically. And like I said, this is where the model for Taiwan is. And I think that there are people in Taiwan, whether you're talking about whatever parties, and if it's whether it's the DPP, which is in power, or the KMT, which is now gotten some power back. I think that the biggest thing is they need to communicate the experience of what they went through to make their society modernized, to make their society wealthy, which it is, and also one that the rest of the world says, we want to work with them. And they will want to therefore work with China. And if they can do that, then I think we will see a whole new era of China's relationship with the rest of the world. But Taiwan plays a role. But right now, this is what I say about diplomatically. Right now, the diplomatic way is America talks to China. Taiwan's not even in the...
Right.
If you put them in there and let's have Taiwan and China talk together with others, then I think maybe we'll come to some solutions which we may not have seen before.
Sure. Very interesting. One last point, you are, I understand because your ancestors are region, you're not promoting trade or collaboration between Taiwan and Italy. Are there anything you believe that Taiwan can cooperate with Italy? I know, Italy now has a very promising leader, Maroni, the female, and she's doing a remarkable job. So any collaboration possibilities between Taiwan and Italy? And then what's the role you are facilitating in between?
Well, I'm not playing a role. I mean, as a member of the American Chamber of Commerce in Taiwan, we're always interested in all foreign businesses working in Taiwan. We also work closely with the ECCT, the European Chamber of Commerce. So, and Italy is talking about maybe even having an Italian Chamber of Commerce set up here in Taiwan. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities because, again, you're talking about societies. They had a investment forum, I think, in April this year, where they had somebody from the Bank of Italy, the central bank, come in and talk about the economies. There's actually a lot of similarities between Taiwan and Italy because you have a lot of family-run businesses. Small, medium-sized enterprises. They like to focus on technology. I think the statistic was interesting. They said Italy has the highest number of working hours out of anybody, the second most in all the EU. And part of that, we agree, is because you have a lot of family-run businesses.
Yeah, they are very diligent.
They're diligent because if you're working for your family business, you're going to work on weekends no matter what. And I think the other thing is, too, is there's a lot of similarities where the Taiwan companies in the technology can improve the Italian businesses. The Italian businesses, let's say, understand the brands, the Lavazas, the Ferraris, these types of things. And therefore, you have a very good partnership. And also, too, you talk about the new prime minister in Italy. I think one thing is she's been very, I think where she's getting a lot of support is she's been very pro-EU, pro-NATO even. She's been against the war in Iraq, or excuse me, in Ukraine. And I think what she's been saying is, look, these are opportunities for us to develop other industries, let's say, as security, defense, technology, these areas. So and she also was the country that was willing to pull out of the Belt and Road Initiative, the Idailu. That's important because I think what it says is, and by the way, just remember, she pulled out of the Idailu and
then she visited China.
Exactly, and nothing happened.
In July,
China did not smack down Italy. They didn't put sanctions on Italy. They weren't angry about it because I think they realized. I think my personal feeling is that especially maybe somebody like Xi Jinping, who is very proud of Chinese culture and the historical role, he looks at Italy and says, here's a culture that was also the cradle of Western culture, Italy, the Roman Empire, and we're the cradle of Asian culture. And he says, I have to be very careful when I say I want to really, stop talking to Italy. Because the other reason, too, is Italy is not a small country in Europe. It's a major economy. If he was to crack down on Italy, it would really present some problems for, I think, for China's relations with the EU. And he uses the EU sometimes the relationship to also counter the United States relationship. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities right now for Italy because economically, societally, in terms of technology, there's a lot of opportunities for Taiwan and Italy to be able to work together, and co-invest. And I met with some private equity investors and family offices in Italy while I was there in Turin, which is the industrial base of it in Italy, the automotive center. And there's a lot of interest. Again, it goes back to, though, they have interest and they have a lot of families that even like to want to invest here, but they don't have a lot of information. And that's why I said people like yourself.
People we can work together to facilitate that.
That's right.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, thank you very much. We're coming to the end of the program. 今天很高兴，我们请到了一位这段我用中文讲，请到我们的好朋友，他是一位外国朋友美国人这个陈历世先生 Chris Cottorone， 他到我们的节目里面来，他本身对非常了解科技的产业，那也研究台湾的家族企业，连接台湾的中小企业。他在政大拿到他的这个 MBA 的这个学位，他在中国大陆这个工作过求学过，那他也在这个台湾念书过，也在台湾这个工作了20-30年，他的夫人也是台湾他刚才给我们做了很多宝贵的分享，包括这个台湾本身的优势，台湾的本身的这个资本市场，台湾的很多的中小企业的这个勤奋。从长期来讲，我们也讲了未来的地缘政治各方面的这些的风险。但我想台湾呢，就是在全世界，诚如他所讲，有一个不可取代的地位，因为台湾我们是很多的这个就是我们被创造、被利用的价值，我们是一个很多的这个大家的 partner。所以我们让其他的这个国家、其他的这个世界的公司成功，我想这是台湾的优势的所在。那我们都很爱台湾，我们也希望台湾的明日更好。So we really thank Chris for your coming to the show. Today is very enlightening. I think we all learned a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. 我们下周同一时间再见。拜拜。